There have been a lot of DC movies released over the years, but there have also been a lot that haven't been released. These are all the DC movies that were in development, what they were going to be about, and why they were cancelled. There are very few movies as close to being made as George Miller's Justice League Mortal. In 2007, Michelle and Kieran Mulroney were hired to write the script. They then completed it by the middle of the year, and due to how much Warner Brothers liked it, they fast-tracked the production. The only problem for the studio was that a Writers Guild of America strike was imminent, which would greatly affect the filming process, as no form of writing could be done on set or during post-production reshoots if an agreement between the writers and studios wasn't resolved by that time. Juno director Jason Reitman was offered the opportunity to direct the film, but turned it down. So Babe, Pig and the City director George Miller came on board in September of 2007. Warner Brothers had so much trust in the success of Justice League Mortal that it was given a projected budget of $220 million, which at the time would have made it the fourth most expensive movie ever made, not adjusting for inflation, only behind Pirates of the Caribbean Dead Man's Chest, Spider-Man 3, and Pirates of the Caribbean At World's End. This Justice League film was not going to be connected with the Dark Knight or Superman Returns franchises, instead be set in its own world with the intention of spinning off characters with their own movies. For this reason, Miller wanted to cast young actors so they could play the characters for many years. So those officially cast actors were DJ Cotrona as Superman, Armie Hammer as Batman, Australia's Megan Gale as Wonder Woman, Common was cast as Jon Stewart's Green Lantern, Adam Brody would play the Flash, Hugh Keys-Byrne as Martian Manhunter, Santiago Cabrera as Aquaman, and the main villain Maxwell Lord would be played by Jay Baruchel. Teresa Palmer was also cast as Talia al Ghul, who would have a Russian accent. Costumes had been made and fitted, action scenes were planned out, things were really moving along until November of 2007 when the writer's strike commenced. Delay on filming was postponed, but by the time the strikes ended on February 12, 2008, they were ready to begin filming in Australia. That was until the Australian Film Finance Corporation pulled the 40% tax rebate assigned to the production because the commission didn't believe Justice League Mortal had hired enough local talent to warrant the discount. George Miller was not happy, publicly stating that they missed out on a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity because of, quote, very lazy thinking. So production intended to move to Canada, but because it was going to be one of the most expensive movies ever made, Warner Brothers needed that rebate, which Canada weren't willing to give either. On top of this, Warner Brothers was starting to rethink the whole movie. They had a cast of unknown actors whose contracts had lapsed, and The Dark Knight was just a massive financial and critical success for them, so decided Justice League Mortal would no longer move forward. While we never got to see the film, in 2013 the script was leaked online, so we got to at least read the film. The story takes inspiration from Justice League Tower of Babel and Crisis on Infinite Earths. It would have seen Maxwell Lord and Talia al Ghul hijack Batman's surveillance system to monitor the Justice League. The team would then be weakened by an army of OMAC super soldiers with the ability to attack their weaknesses. Ultimately, Batman kills Maxwell to save Superman from mind control, but Lord's consciousness lives on in digital form and possesses Barry Allen, transforming him into OMAC Ultra. Barry sacrifices himself by breaking the speed barrier, destroying Maxwell and the OMACs. Then in the aftermath, the surviving heroes decide to officially form the Justice League.
I'm putting together a team. People with special abilities.
Speaking of Justice League movies and movies inspired by Crisis on Infinite Earths, that idea was also in consideration to be adapted to the big screen. And that's pretty much all we know about it, other than it being set in the DCEU. Zack Snyder's Justice League sequel was also set in the DCEU, but it was initially intended to be 2 parts, with the sequel set for June 14, 2019. This idea was later changed to be 2 distinct films, but after the movie's release to mixed reviews and an underwhelming box office, the sequel was put on indefinite hold and officially cancelled after the DCU reboot.
Maybe some other time.
Before Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, we were going to get Batman vs Superman Asylum. I don't know why either of them needed a subtitle. Batman vs Superman should be enough to get people to see the movie. Anyway, in 2001, Warner Brothers wanted to reboot the Superman franchise, but when Seven writer Andrew Kevin Walker pitched an idea pitting Superman against Batman, he was hired along with Air Force One director Wolfgang Peterson to helm the film. After turning in the script, the studio found it to be too tonally dark and hired Batman and Robin writer Akiva Goldman to do rewrites. These rewrites saw Clark Kent having divorced Lois Lane and Bruce Wayne retired for 5 years from being Batman. However, he's still haunted by the deaths of Dick Grayson, Alfred, and Commissioner Gordon. He then has to add another name to the list when the Joker kills his new wife, Elizabeth Miller, on their honeymoon. Grief leads to Bruce becoming Batman again and learning that Lex Luthor is scheming something big. As Clark rekindles a relationship with Lana Lang in Smallville, he tries to help Bruce heal, but Wayne blames him for Elizabeth's death. Manipulated by Luthor, the two clash before ultimately reconciling and joining forces to defeat Luthor and prevent a meteor disaster. The movie was expected to be released in 2004, with the studio wanting Johnny Depp as Batman and Josh Hartnett as Superman, but ultimately decided to cancel it as they were in development on other standalone Batman and Superman projects, deciding to focus on those instead. Although, the movie was referenced in 2007's I Am Legend, a film also written by Akiva Goldsman. Not only did I Am Legend tease the Batman vs Superman film, but it also revealed that Warner Bros. Had plans to make a live-action Teen Titans movie. In 2007, development began on the movie with the I Am Legend writer. Robin was the only confirmed member to appear on the Teen Titans team, but the film never eventuated. There's no official reason as to why this is, but there are many movies that go through the development phase and never get made. We only hear about a few, so when it gets cancelled, it seems like it's a bigger deal than it actually is. Despite this, Akiva did go on to develop the TV series Titans in 2018, so some of those movie ideas may have been used for this series. On top of that, it's been reported that a live-action Teen Titans movie is currently in development to be part of the new DCEU.
It's always been my dream to have my own movie.
The stretchy-powered Plastic Man had been trying to get his own film for decades. Kevin Smith even wrote a treatment for the character over the years. Following the success of 1989's Batman, Steven Spielberg, Kathleen Kennedy, and Frank Marshall's company, Amblin Entertainment, were in development on a feature for Warner Bros. And DreamWorks in 1992. The Wachowskis were on board to write, with Brian Spicer directing. We then had 14 years of no movement before the Wachowskis decided to get it going again, setting a release date for December 2009. Among the names considered for the title role were Jim Carrey and Bruce Campbell, but Keanu Reeves was ultimately cast. Although, it just seemed like other movies took priority over something like Plastic Man, which is why it was never made. This vision was said to be of a light tone and comedically humorous, with Plastic Man described as a Captain Planet type looking to protect the Earth from pollution and climate change. By 2013, there were new rumours that Plastic Man was set to appear on the big screen, but not in his own film, in the 2017 Justice League movie played by David Tennant. That obviously turned out to be just a rumour, but in 2018, a solo film was back on the cards, and to be a part of the DCEU, this version was set to reimagine the character as a female. Although, unfortunately for fans of this character, the DCEU rebooted, cancelling all those films in development, and as of to date, we are yet to see a Plastic Man, Woman, or Them film hit the big screen.
Got it. Save the money.
Before the first Green Lantern movie was released, the film's director, Martin Campbell, was talking about it being a trilogy. Writers had even been hired to write the second entry while the first was being filmed. The second screenplay was to follow a story about Sinestro becoming corrupt to the dark power of the Yellow Ring, as teased in the post-credit scene of the first film. However, due to the negative reception of said film, and it being a box office disappointment, those plans for future films were tossed in the bin. But as for Green Lantern getting a first film, that was a struggle of its own. Starting in 1997, Warner Bros. Went to Kevin Smith and said, "Thanks for your Superman Live script, we will definitely make this. Now can you please write us a Green Lantern film that we will also definitely make?" But then Kev was like, "It sounds like you're not going to end up making either of these films. So, no thank you." WB then approached Quentin Tarantino to write and direct, someone who almost made a movie based on Iron Man, The Silver Surfer, and Luke Cage, and now we can add Green Lantern to that list, because that also never amounted to anything. By 2004, Robert Smigel was working on a script, which was said to have a comedic tone, so Jack Black was cast to play the title character. However, once people found out about this, they went onto the internet to definitely leave only respectful comments about their disagreement towards the direction of this film, leading to Warner Bros. Deciding to drop the comedy aspect. So when in doubt, bring in David S. Goyer for literally anything comic book related, because after reading his Batman Begins script, they offered him to write and direct either a Green Lantern or Flash film. However, he chose The Flash, a film that was also cancelled, but I'll talk more about that later in the video. Corey Reynolds then pitched a Green Lantern trilogy with Jon Stewart in the lead. Unfortunately, this idea ended up being tossed aside in favour of a different version written by Michael Green and Mark Guggenheim. But then that idea was also scrapped due to the script being leaked online in 2008. The story was to be a Hal Jordan origin story, while also featuring characters Carol Ferris, Kilowog, Sinestro, and the villain Hector Hammond. It also had cameos from Guy Gardner and Superman. Due to this leak, rewrites were made, new writers were brought on, and we eventually got the 2011 version of Green Lantern. So with this particular version of Green Lantern no longer getting any sequels, the DCEU tried to bring the character back to the big screen. The intention was to make a Green Lantern Corps film featuring Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart as the lead characters. It had a planned release date of June 19, 2020, with David S. Goyer and Justin Rhodes attached to write and direct the picture. I'll talk more about how and why most of these DCEU projects were cancelled shortly, but the scrapped idea was said to feature Batman and Ryan Reynolds in a cameo as one of the background Green Lanterns. Despite this being cancelled, a Lantern series set in the DCU will be released in 2026, featuring a number of Green Lanterns. Speaking of green, David S. Goyer and Justin Marks were writing a Green Arrow movie in 2008. Originally titled Supermax, it got a name change to Green Arrow Escape from Supermax, where Green Arrow would be trying to escape from Supermax prison after being framed for a crime he didn't commit. Being set in the high-security prison, we would have seen many DC villains, including the Riddler, Lex Luthor, and even Joker. Co-writer Justin Marks, who majored in architecture in college, spoke about how much thought was put into the design of the prison, because you need different cells to contain different powered villains, and security systems to control that. Therefore, the film would have been one of the most elaborate heists ever put to screen. Over the years, the movie just went away and never got made, but elements of this script were used for the 7th season of Arrow, when Oliver Queen is locked in the maximum security prison.
I am the Green Arrow.
One of the biggest movie stars in the 1980s was Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is why he was hired to play Sgt Rock in a movie about a non-commissioned officer during World War II. Now, the character of Sgt Rock is known to be American, and Arnold Schwarzenegger's accent isn't what typically comes to mind when you think of an American accent. Therefore, it was determined that the character would have a German-American father and the ability to speak German, so he could use this to his advantage against the enemy. A script was written by a number of different writers over the years, and when I say a number of different years, by 2007, Arnold Schwarzenegger had aged out of the role, with the intention to have him replaced by the much younger Bruce Willis. This latest iteration was confirmed to include the Easy Company, but no longer set in World War II, instead being a fictional war in the not-too-distant future. Guy Ritchie was on board to direct, but the project was shelved when he went to make Sherlock Holmes. However, after that film was released, there was no further movement on the Sgt Rock movie. That was until fairly recently, where it looks like we may be getting one set in the new DCU.
I'll be back.
Wes Craven wrote and directed a Swamp Thing movie in the early 1980s. Then, in 2009, there were plans to make another. From what I've read, it's hard to tell if it would have been an entirely new story or a reboot on Wes Craven's version. But what we do know is that Akiva Goldsman was writing it, and Vincenzo Natali would be the director. While nothing came of it, there were plans to put the character in the DC Extended Universe, which I'll talk about more in a moment. Zatanna is a magician who performs spells by speaking backwards, and a film centered around her was in development in 2005. The feature was to be an action comedy focusing on the teenage years of the character, but no further movement came on the project until 2018, when Warner Bros. Decided to finally bring Zatanna to the screen as a part of the DCEU. And when I say screen, I mean small screen, because Zatanna was initially intended to be a film released exclusively on their streaming service HBO Max. But 4 years later, they no longer wanted to make the movie for their streaming service and shopped the script around to other platforms, though that ultimately amounted to nothing. Back in 2006, Guillermo del Toro was adapting a movie based on the anti-hero, Deadman. Nothing is known about the plot, but for those who don't know the character, Deadman is a dead man known as Boston Brand who was murdered during a circus performance. As a ghost, he possesses others, trying to find his killer, but along the way, he decides to use his powers to save others. Now, nothing came of that film. However, in November of 2012, Del Toro signed on to write and direct Justice League Dark that was said to not only feature Deadman, but also Swamp Thing and Zatanna. Other characters considered were John Constantine, Madame Xanadu, and Edigan. In 2014, Del Toro turned in a script to Warner Bros. And revealed that the Justice League Dark movie would be a part of a very different universe, implying it would be separate to the DCEU, instead a part of the Dark Universe, not to be confused with Universal's Dark Universe, featuring movies like The Mummy, However, by the middle of 2015, the movie was shelved, so Guillermo went on to do other things, and then eventually left the project altogether. The following year, Variety reported that notable action director Doug Liman was to helm the project, but when there was another year of no movement, he too left the project due to scheduling conflicts. In 2020, Warner Bros. Decided to take a different approach to the Justice League Dark by taking advantage of their streaming service and adapting the concept into a show with J.J. Abrams as executive producer. Each character would get their own series, or in Zatanna's case, a film, before the crossover Justice League Dark series. Although the reset to the DC universe meant all this was cancelled. But we know that Constantine at least might be getting a Keanu Reeves-led sequel sometime soon.
I guess there's a plan for all of us.
The Blackhawks are a team of World War II ace pilots, and in the early 1980s, Steven Spielberg was planning on adapting the comic series with Dan Aykroyd in the lead. However, when George Lucas asked Spielberg to direct Raiders of the Lost Ark, Steve decided to make that instead. But nearly 40 years later, Steven Spielberg once again had interest in directing a Blackhawks film. Longtime collaborator, David Koepp was writing the screenplay with the intention to start filming after Spielberg finished making West Side Story. It seemed like COVID was the reason for stalling that goal, but that didn't stop progress on the movie. Until the DC Universe took over new management. Having said that, the script is done, which Koepp and Spielberg are very happy with, so it's kind of in the hands of James Gunn and Peter Safran. If they do approve on making it, then Dave said he'd be willing to adapt the script to fit in the new DCU, if need be. Maybe he should tell James Gunn he'll put G.I. Robot in it. That might intrigue him to greenlight the film.
Miss Waller promised it would be soon.
Holden Carver is a double agent who fused with an alien artifact, giving him the ability to not feel pain, instead storing it and passing it on to others through physical touch. Ed Brubaker created this character in the limited series Sleeper in 2003, and in 2008, Spider-Man director Sam Raimi and Spider-Man watcher Tom Cruise were in the process of adapting this comic into a movie. Matt Damon and Ben Affleck also came on board in 2013 as producers. However, according to Brubaker, Sam and Tom's version was at least the 5th attempt at someone trying to adapt his comic. Despite these big names attached, the spy noir espionage story hasn't been heard about since Matt and Ben's involvement broke. Personally, I would be interested in seeing something like this. In an era where we've gotten many comic book movies over the years, I like the idea of producing something that's significantly different and more contained.
I agree.
After the success of the Sandman comics, work began to bring this graphic novel to the big screen, a story about the Lord of Demons who escapes prison after 70 years, seeking to rebuild his fallen kingdom. This went through a number of different writers and directors throughout the late 90s and early 2000s, but no script was pleasing anyone, particularly co-creator Neil Gaiman, who didn't like the mistreatment of characters, describing one of the screenplays to be the worst script he's ever read. This seemed to stall the project until 2013, when Joseph Gordon-Levitt became attached to star and Gaiman on board as producer. This again went through a number of years of script changes, so in 2016, and the day after another writer left the project, Joseph Gordon-Levitt decided to leave too. This led to many involved suggesting they make The Sandman into a TV show instead, which is eventually what happened, with the first episode premiering in 2022.
You are coming back, aren't you?
Why would I not return, Lucien?
Watchmen was created in 1986 and had a film released in 2009, but development on a movie started before the comic was even published. Producer Lawrence Gordon acquired those rights, had a script written, and intended on putting the film to the big screen in 1991 with distribution from 20th Century Fox. Although trying to condense an entire 12-issue miniseries into one film was proving to be challenging. Over the years, this led to distribution changing to Warner Bros., writers and directors came and went, casting was looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger to play Dr. Manhattan, and the budget became a problem. It soon dawned upon everyone that maybe Watchmen was something that couldn't be adapted into a movie, and thus WB abandoned that concept. There were then attempts to make the movie independently, or even as a TV miniseries, but too many involved felt the story was too dark and complex for people to understand and or appreciate. Attempts were made again in the early 2000s, but this too went through a number of different writers, directors, actors, and even studios. By the time Zack Snyder directed the movie, 20th Century Fox, Warner Bros., Universal Studios, and Paramount Pictures had all been attached to the project. In the end, WB and Paramount ended up co-producing the picture, which was lucky that one company didn't finance the entire $150 million budget, because they only made $187, which means it would have lost money. Even though the box office was larger than the budget, for those who don't know, the budget doesn't always include marketing costs, and a percentage of the box office goes to the cinemas. Having said that, the cult following the film has received over the years, plus a director's cut, means Watchmen has probably at least broken even financially by now.
Follow the money.
It's now the part of the video where I go through all the movies announced to be a part of the DCEU, but were never made, partly due to underwhelming box office results, partly due to underwhelming reviews, and partly due to change in management at DC. Justice League teased Deathstroke, but Joe Manganiello had been in talks to star in his own movie a year before that film's release. The Raid director, Gareth Evans, was also in talks around the same time to write and direct the film. DC executives did however like the pitch, which was described as a dark and unforgiving origin story with a film noir vibe. Deathstroke was also said to be the primary villain in Ben Affleck's Batman movie, which Affleck was said to also be directing and co-writing with Geoff Johns. It would have been set after the events of Justice League, but after stresses surrounding that film and things going on in Ben's personal life, he stepped away from the director chair. Matt Reeves was then hired as his replacement in February 2017. The new version of the film was said to focus on early days of Batman, but with Affleck still in the role, until he left the project, was replaced by Robert Pattinson, and had the movie removed from the DCEU continuity. From Batman to Batgirl, we have a couple of cancelled projects to talk about regarding this character. First up was a spin-off to the 1966 Batman, but that didn't make it past a 7-minute pitch. However, a Batgirl movie that went way beyond a pitch, way beyond a script, and way beyond filming was the DCEU Batgirl film. Directed by Bad Boys for Life directors Adil El Arbri and Bill El Falal, with a screenplay by Bumblebee writer Christina Hodson, the film was planned to be released exclusively on HBO Max. The cast included Leslie Grace as Barbara Gordon/Batgirl, J.K. Simmons and Michael Keaton were reprising their roles as James Gordon and Batman respectively, while Brendan Fraser was to be the main villain, Firefly. So why, even after spending all this money, was Batgirl cancelled? Well, after the Warner Bros. Discovery merger, the company felt that the movie simply did not work for what CEO David Zaslav now wanted DC films to be, that being big theatrical event films. By cancelling the film in August of 2022, it became one of the most expensive cancelled films of all time, although the studio was able to get some of this money back by writing the film off as a tax break. As disappointing as it may be not to have the film released, there were probably none more saddened than co-director Adil, who found out the film was being cancelled on his wedding day. Even though the movie was in post-production, I couldn't really find much about what the plot was going to be, only something written by Ned's Good Takes, who basically summarised it as a story about Barbara Gordon who's obsessed with martial arts. After her mother dies in a suspicious fire, Barbara grows up working at the Gotham City Police Department while caring for her retired father, Jim. Inspired by Batman, she creates her own suit, investigates her mother's death, and uncovers that Firefly was involved along with some other crime lords, eventually ending with Barbara vowing to fight crime as Batgirl.
If you call me Batgirl, can I call you Batboy?
2016 Suicide Squad was set to have several spin-offs. Deadshot starring Will Smith was one, Joker starring Jared Leto was another, Harley Quinn was going to get a bunch, including Gotham City Sirens with Catwoman and Poison Ivy, which was said to explore a romantic relationship between Quinn and Ivy, but the studio instead decided to make Birds of Prey in the way too long title. And said movie was going to create spin-offs of its own, a HBO Max exclusive Black Canary film, and a theatrical Harley Quinn vs. the Joker, which was rumoured to be based on Paul Dini's Mad Love run. It even had a completed script written by Focus writers Glenn Ficarra and John Requa, who were also intending on directing the picture. Most of these movies seem to be cancelled due to the Suicide Squad film, which itself was going to get a sequel, but decided to prioritise setting up the new DCU instead. It did, however, get multiple spin-offs, including Peacemaker and Creature Commandos.
I think we can arguably circumvent our new restrictions.
The Flash intended on resetting the DC continuity so the universe could sort of start fresh with Superman, but the film's sequel seems like it would have been set in the new DCU. A few months before The Flash was released, Aquaman co-writer David Lindsay Johnson McGoldrick had written the sequel ready to film if that movie performed well at the box office. The magical number required for a second movie to be greenlit was around $770 million worldwide. Unfortunately for all parties, it fell about $500 million short. Both Michael Keaton and Sasha Calle were to return, while the main antagonist was set to be Reverse Flash, who would have been the one responsible for the death of Barry's mum. but it now looks like the next time we see the Flash, it'll be a completely fresh start. Although prior to getting that Flash film, there were several attempts to bring the Fast character to the big screen. In the late 1980s, Warner Bros. Hired Jeff Loeb to write a script, at the same time DC Comics asked him to do a revival comic run of Challenges of the Unknown. After choosing the latter, the Flash movie was shelved. Entering the new millennium, WB went back to that shelf and asked David S. Goyer if he wanted to write a Flash film after being impressed with his Batman Begins script. Not only was Dave writing the script, but also directing, and wanted the style of the film to be similar to Sam Raimi's Spider-Man. Goyer asked Ryan Reynolds, who he just directed in Blade Trinity, if he'd be interested in playing the Wally West version of the Flash, which he was. Barry Allen was also intended to be included, but only as a supporting character. The plan was to start filming the movie after Goyer had finished working on 2007's The Invisible, but left The Flash just before that after having creative differences with the studio. Narcos co-creator Chris Brancato was hired for rewrites, while Sean Levy replaced Dave to direct, though that didn't last long due to scheduling conflicts with Night at the Museum, Battle of the Smithsonian. Shanghai Nights director David Dobkin then became Sean's replacement, but new hurdles appeared when the Justice League Mortal film intended on spinning off characters from that movie, plus the 2007 Writers Guild of America strikes halted all writing. After these strikes had been resolved, the script was reworked and Adam Brody was now expected to play the Flash after his Justice League casting. After that film fell through, more creative shifts were being made behind the scenes at Warner Bros. Over the years, to the point where Ryan Reynolds was now playing Green Lantern. And the writers of that film began working on a new Flash script based off Jeff Johns' recent comic run with Barry Allen as the hero. But after Green Lantern's financial and critical disappointment, Warner Bros. Decided to focus on other films and come back to The Flash at a later stage. That later stage being the film released in 2023, 20 years after David S. Goyer started working on one.
Gotta go fast!
Patty Jenkins, who directed the Wonder Woman movies, said that a third film was written, intending on concluding the character's story arc. Warner Bros. Had greenlit the film, Jenkins was signed on to direct, and Gal Gadot was also set to return as the title character, with filming expected to begin in the middle of 2023. And unlike those first two films, this third entry would have been set in the present day. There was also an Amazon spin-off in development before the release of Wonder Woman 1984, which would have been set between the second and third films. While that may have been cancelled, it looks like we're getting something similar with the Paradise Lost TV show set in the DCEU, which is said to be a political drama on Themyscira set before the birth of Wonder Woman. But before all of that, there were plans to bring Wonder Woman to the big screen since 1996, with names being rumoured to star like Sandra Bullock, Mariah Carey, Catherine Zeta-Jones, and Lucy Lawless. Lou noted that she pulled out of the running due to the script not portraying Wonder Woman as a flawed hero. By 2005, numerous scripts had been written and rewritten, but eventually Warner Bros. Announced that Joss Whedon would both write and direct the picture, who had Kobe Smulders in mind to star. This version of the script eventually made its way online, with the story having taken place in the present. Steve Trevor would be a former soldier en route to deliver aid to a war-torn country, but ends up crash landing on Themyscira. The Themyscirans then want to end Steve's life due to fear he'll expose their hidden world, but Diana steps in to save him before the pair go on to deliver this aid while Wonder Woman learns about the outside world. Now, I haven't actually read the script, I just looked at a bunch of summaries online, but from those who did read it, they haven't really said great things, so maybe it being cancelled was for the best. Whedon even knew this, because he explained that he had to take on the film that, well, nobody liked, which is why it was cancelled.
No!
2018's Aquaman made over $1 billion at the box office, so finding a way to make more of that led to discussions of a horror-themed spin-off focusing on the Trench Kingdom and Black Manta. The team behind Aquaman were to be involved in some way, shape or form, developing a film that would take place between Aquaman 1 and 2. Those plans were ultimately cancelled before that sequel, but Black Manta was the main antagonist in Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Before either of those Aquaman movies came to be, Leonardo DiCaprio almost produced a solo movie back in 2003, but little to no details are known about the project, other than someone named Ben Grant expected to write the script. Now, the Aquaman movies we got saw Jason Momoa star as the title character, although he will soon be playing a different DC character in Supergirl, that being Lobo, a character who almost got a solo movie of his own. There was a comedic iteration written by Gerald E. Brown in the late 90s, and a DCEU version that started development as early as 2009. Guy Ritchie and Brad Peyton were both names once attached to direct the film, and Rock the Dwayne Johnson was the actor attached to star. And in 2018, Michael Bay's name was attached to direct it. Most of these versions were just in early development, so no details have been revealed about what any of these iterations could have been about, but for those who don't know who the character of Lobo is, he's an intergalactic bounty hunter with the powers of super everything. In 2008, a Shazam movie was in pre-production, with Rock the Dwayne Johnson in talks to play the film's villain, Black Adam. The film was intended on being a light-hearted action comedy, but when that year's gritty Dark Knight movie became a massive success, and the family-friendly Speed Racer was a financial disaster, Warner Brothers wanted the script to be rewritten with a darker, more serious tone. By the time that was written, Man of Steel was in development, which the studio felt would end up being too similar to Shazam, so scrapped the latter. That was until the year after Man of Steel was released, where Rock the Dwayne Johnson announced he would be a part of the Shazam film, but hadn't decided if he would be the title character or Black Adam. When he made the decision to be Black Adam, WB announced he would be getting his own solo film alongside Shazam instead of appearing in that movie, which led us to the motion pictures we got. And remember when Rock the Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam became the hierarchy of the DCEU? Well, that lasted one whole movie. The film set up his character to fight Henry Cavill's Superman, but the underwhelming box office and critical reception of Black Adam, plus it being released around the time James Gunn and Peter Safran took over DC, meant those plans were scrapped.
We should talk.
Wonder Twin powers activate in the form of nothing. Yes, in February 2022, Zan and Jane were set to get a HBO exclusive feature film. It actually got pretty far along, with Adam Seichel not only on board to write and direct, but KJ Apa and Isabel May were cast as the Wonder Twins. Filming was scheduled for July of 2022, but was cancelled 2 months before cameras started rolling when the Warner Brothers merger with Discovery led to the company restructuring. As I mentioned earlier, the new CEO David Zaslav decided to focus on theatrical first films, rather than mid-budget concepts that seemed too niche. Another comic duo also had their DCEU film cancelled, that being Booster Gold and Blue Beetle. This project started development in 2015, but despite not being made, we did get a Blue Beetle solo film in 2023, and might be getting a live-action Booster Gold TV series set in the DCU. Speaking of Gold, a movie centered around the New Gods was in active development in early 2018 with Selma director Ava DuVernay. If you're wondering how I got to New Gods from Gold, well, God is just gold without the L. That's just a little behind the scenes on how intelligent my brain is. I'm able to notice subtle things like that. Anyway, the script was said to have a Star Wars feel about it. There are conflicting reports as to whether the New Gods movie would be set in the DCEU or not, as Variety said it would be, while Deadline published an article at the exact same time saying it would take place in a different universe. What makes me think it might have been separate is that Ava confirmed that Darkseid would be in the film, but likely a different iteration to the DCEU version. Regardless, other characters confirmed to be in the film were the female furries, All Widow, Mr. Miracle, Big Barda, Granny Goodness, and Highfather. Due to the crowded slate of films, The New Gods was cancelled on April Fool's Day in 2021. But it was no prank. Warner Brothers and DC did say that if they did decide to make a New Gods movie in the future, the team behind this project would be the first people they call. Other DCEU projects that were either announced or in development but had very little details on include a Static Shock film following the character with electricity-based powers that started development in August of 2020 with Michael B. Jordan as producer and Randy McKinnon as the screenwriter. A Val Zod series following the Kryptonian was also set to be produced by Michael B. Jordan, with the possibility of him also starring in the show. This came about after he previously pitched a separate Superman movie for him to be the lead of. From Val Zod to Zor-El, Sasha Carly's Supergirl was supposed to get a movie after first appearing in The Flash. After first appearing in Batman v Superman Dawn of Justice, Ray Fisher was eventually going to get his own Cyborg film, but it kept getting pushed further and further back. He was going to appear in The Flash, first as a buddy film, then a cameo, but was written out when Fisher declared that he would, quote, not participate in any production associated with then President of DC, Walter Hamada. This decision was made when Ray believed there was poor handling of Joss Whedon's alleged gross, abusive, and unprofessional behaviour during the Justice League reshoots. The same day Zack Snyder's Justice League was released on HBO Max, Warner Bros. Announced that an Aquaman movie would be coming soon, which would presumably follow the character who created a serum that gives Rex Tyler an hour of power. Dick Grayson's Nightwing was going to get his own film, with the Lego Batman director, Chris McKay, on board. The restructuring didn't actually cancel this film, instead just dropped down the list of movies DC were prioritising over. However, McKay has since said that the movie could be reworked to fit in the new DCEU. As for the cancelled Man of Steel sequel film set in the DCEU, I've already spoken about that in my cancelled Superman movies video, which you can check out in the playlist at the end of the video. As you can see, a lot of those movies were announced, but had little to no info surrounding them, which is the same for these additional movies set outside the DCEU. New Line Cinema was to adapt the graphic novel Ronin in 1998, with Darren Aronofsky as director. After nearly a decade without any movement, they tried again with Sylvan White at the helm, but that also amounted to nothing. Adam Turner was hired to write a Doom Patrol movie in 2006, said to follow a mad scientist and putting together a team of supers with unusual powers. It did however get a 4-season show starting in 2019. Metal Man began development in 2007, about half a dozen robots with the power of different metals. In 2010 there were rumours of a Starman movie, but those claims were later revealed to be false. A Hawkman film was in development in the early 2010s. Paramount Pictures acquired the rights to The Mighty in 2011, following a police officer who tries to take down a villain who is a superhero. And a movie centered around Monolith the Golem was in development at Lionsgate in 2016, with Dave Wilson attached to direct. Now, you may have noticed I didn't include Batman or Superman films, because they each need their own video due to the amount there are. However, I have already released the Superman video, and maybe by the time you're watching this, the Batman one too, which you can check out in the playlist along with other cancelled movies like Marvel, Spider-Man, X-Men, and Star Wars. I also only spoke about the movies that were going to get a theatrical release, so that's why I didn't include TV movies or animated home-released films. But thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments which of these DC movies you wish was made, and don't forget to absolutely obliterate those like, subscribe, and share buttons. I'm just kidding. Only do it with enough force that it registers. I don't want any of you breaking whatever device you're watching this on.